get your reaction to this, because it's just an interesting question that I'm always kind of thinking about the correct way to approach. And obviously you brought it to my mind by mentioning the Hillary Trump election, and I voted for Jill Stein in that election. Hillary obviously took more money from AIPAC than any of the other candidates, and obviously Biden did too. Obviously, I would never, ever vote for a Republican, let alone Trump. But I'm also do take the moral stance that I just can't participate in, voting for candidates that are that level of corrupt, that, have that much blood on their hands, et cetera. Well, what's your guys thinking on that question? Do you think it's worth like biting the bullet and voting for Democrats like Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden that are gonna, continue the status quo in Palestine and yada, yada, yada? Or like, what's your best view of resistance to that kind of neoliberalism?
Well, don't you hear? The Republicans are the party of unions now. Josh Hawley and Marco Rubio, they're fucking shitting all over those big companies. You can go first, Prasad. I just had to get that
I think it's a tough question. Like, I think I probably tend to be a little bit more like, look at any ground that you can take and take that ground that you can for leftist causes. In fact, I'm reminded that I think the first time I ever interacted with you guys, I think you had like Epoch Philosophy on way back at the beginning. And I think I commented in the chat about Andrew Yang. And I remember there's like a bit of it. And I know obviously Andrew Yang has been like really shit lately with his comments about Israel and stuff like that, clearly. But I think I think one of the reasons like he appealed to me at the time was because, and I think part of this comes from me like studying academic political science and political theory, like especially in the political science side and public policy, you study like sort of like when are the opportunities for change? Like a lot of like academic political science is trying to explain how do institutional and political changes occur? What are like the opportunities? And you guys have probably heard the term, the Overton window, like in terms of like a policy opportunity. I think like the reason I thought one of the things that attracted me to Yang initially at the time was it seemed like there was a lot of people on the right who were attracted to him. And I thought that it seemed like there was potentially an opportunity to like affirmatively gain some ground. And then like, let's just say hypothetically that, there was a universal basic income that would like put people in a position to be able to resist and push for more left-wing things.
And you called yourself a post-partisan leftist, right? So that would kind of fit it right into that.
Yeah. And like, I think, what I mean by that is sometimes I think we get a little bit too fixated on like the political label, like almost, we get a little bit emotionally attached to like this label of socialism. And then, but like, we forget like what I think the left is supposed to be about, which are, I want to be like outcome focused, meaning I like why are we supporting something? Like, what's the outcome we want?
I want to say that just on Victor's point, I'm also a pretty outcome-focused guy, and this is why I had some tough choices during the American election, right? So I'm Canadian. I can't actually vote, but I teach at an American university, very involved in American politics. I spent the last 5 years doing nothing but dunking on Trump, talking about postmodern conservatism, as I call it, all that stuff. And I was a Bernie Sanders supporter. I am a Bernie Sanders supporter, right? I think that democratic socialism is the way to go. We can talk about what that means, because as Victor pointed out, it means a lot of things to different people. So when,
including
everything that happened. Sorry?
Including to Bernie Sanders himself?
Oh, yeah, 100%, right? It's changed a lot over time. But, around the time when, he lost and Biden was clearly going to be the Democratic candidate, I released a piece with my friend Ben Burgess and a few others saying we should get behind Biden. And we took a lot of flack for that. We expected it. And the argument was, look, Biden is a shit candidate. There's no doubt about it. He's bad in a lot of things. He's especially bad when it comes to foreign policy, as you guys pointed out. But we do have an opportunity here to trade something that's bad for something that's awful. And I think Noam Chomsky put it really well around this time, where he said, look, real politics isn't exhausted by voting for one guy or another, which is the mistake a lot of people who just put their faith in representative democracy make. Real politics continues after the election, where you start trying to do everything that you can to move the Democratic Party left. And if it's not going to go left, you do everything you can to build up those institutions so down the line it will move left, whether they want it to or not. So that's the kind of tag that I took.
Yeah, and I feel a lot. I feel where you guys are coming from on a lot of those issues, and I'll put my cards on the table too. I did vote for Joe Biden. Gavin and I had a lot of good conversations about that on the podcast before it happened, and I essentially boiled down my position at the time to something that was what you guys had said. I was looking at the narrow margins and seeing, okay, what could I possibly like tell myself that I'm going to get if I do vote for Joe Biden, and a lot of those things haven't come to fruition, right? He hasn't gotten back in the Iran deal. He has been increasingly hawkish. $2,000 checks, the whole list of things that you could talk about that he didn't do. But what I'm mostly concerned with, and something that I'd like to kind of ask as a follow-up is, I'm more reluctant now to get behind supporting a Democrat in the next election cycle, whether I mean, I'll vote for a Democrat if they're good as a congressional candidate. I'm not above that, but I just don't imagine a solid Democratic candidate being put up in 2024 now. And I'm wondering, what do you guys think about that? How do if Joe Biden is true to his word, which God knows we can never fucking trust him to be, that he is going to seek a second term, where does that put the left now, when we just are really at a turning point where we don't quite have the time to wait another 4 years, potentially 8 years, for somebody like Joe Biden to just keep spinning his wheels if we're not going to go with a third party in 2024?
I mean, the problem, I feel like, is in some ways like much grimmer than that, like in the sense that one of the problems, and I think, you know, we're all Canadian on the Pill Pod, and I think like one of the things that I always feel like is an elephant in the room that isn't talked about that much by the left is just the institutional structure of American politics is such a huge barrier. Like, even if Bernie Sanders became president, you got to get the House of Representatives, you got to get the Senate, and you got to get like past any like sort of constitutional challenges. The advantage, like in Canada, we have a parliamentary system. So like whoever wins the most seats just gets to do whatever they want, right? Like they actually get to push their legislative agenda. And then the public gets to see if they liked what that person actually got to accomplish. In the US, it's like nothing gets done. And then everybody gets to blame the other side for nothing getting done. And like, I feel like there needs to be more discussion about like how to overcome that. So until somehow there's like some plan to overcome, like, how are these things actually going to change? Like, I feel like it doesn't matter. Like, I think sometimes there's a bit of a fantasy on the American left that if Bernie Sanders would have won, it would have been amazing, but like he would have had to overcome all those barriers, which, so I don't know how different it actually would have even been possible for it to be.
Well, my response to that would be that there's a lot of things that an executive just can do. Like, for example, taking cannabis off of the Schedule 1 and essentially legalizing it on a federal level. That's something that the entire Democratic Party was on board with, even like Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, etc. Joe Biden unilaterally decided to take that off of the Democratic Party platform, essentially continuing the drug war, continuing the war on cannabis. So that's an instance where, you know, Bernie versus Biden.
Student debt.
Same thing with student debt. Yeah, that's an instance where Bernie versus Biden in the White House is a, you know, night and day worth of difference. That's, you know, freeing the nonviolent drug offenders, something that Bernie Sanders promised to do. And even
foreign policy.
And even when we talk about, you know, because this is an issue I like to talk about for obvious reasons, but, you know, when it comes to legalization, when it does happen, which it is inevitable, you know, I would much rather have someone like Bernie in the White House when it does than Biden, because Biden's is going to give the farm away to corporate America. He's going to give the farm away to Marlboro and big pharma and all of these companies that want to profit off of cannabis. Bernie promised that he was going to make sure that the communities that were most affected by the war on drugs would kind of be have the first seat at the table in that regard, that, you know, he would give more incentives to smaller businesses in that regard. So I just think there's so many differences on an executive level that we would see. And also just, you know, the posture, you know, posturing yourself against the health insurance industry instead of, you know, being their number one recipient of donation money, and then doing these bullshit COBRA subsidies, which is just a giant handout to the health insurance industry, instead of actually, you know, fighting for people's, you know, health insurance. Just, you know, so many things like that where I think that there would be a world of difference. Although I do agree, the nature of our system would make it very difficult to pass some of his more truly sweeping, truly foundational proposals like Medicare for all, like abolishing the health insurance industry outright. That would definitely be a battle. I'm not denying that. But then again, I think it's worth having someone that's willing to wage that battle in the first place, rather than just, you know, become instantly an ally, a puppet to these corporations instead of even trying to oppose yourself to them. And I think foreign policy is another instance, you know, with what's going on in Israel, Palestine right now. I think Biden's approach has just been fucking disgusting. And that's a story we can get into, because I want to talk about, what were you saying?
I was just going to say, like, I mean, of course, I agree with all that, but I was thinking about it more from the perspective of, like, you know, sustained structural change. Like, that's just not going to happen until like there's a correction to like the way the system functions, like electorally, the institutions.
I want to say something quickly, because I actually tend to agree with you, Gavin. I also agree with Victor that getting Bernie into the White House would not have been enough to actually fix Americans' problems.
Oh, okay.
It wouldn't even be enough to even engage in modest institutional reform to fix the United States' problems, let alone the world's problems. But I do think there'd be a lot of symbolic value in getting somebody like Bernie into office. And I don't think that has to be trivialized, because one of the things that I think was interesting about him labeling himself a democratic socialist and getting reasonably close to a shot at real power was it showed that there is the possibility of building a viable radical left in the United States that most of us 20 years ago would say never going to happen, right? Like, you're more likely to fucking see, dinosaurs come back crawling from the earth than you are to see like a real left emerge in the US. That's now something that's really on the table. And I think that what we need to do is see this less as a defeat, so much as an opportunity to, as Thomas Beck would say, fail, but fail better next time, right? Mm-hmm. We need to build institutions like the Democratic Socialists of America in the USA. We need to build institutions like Courage in the NDP party in Canada. We need to learn from examples in the past where people have built successful left-wing parties from the ground up, allying with other progressive forces and been victorious. And I think there are a lot of good paradigms that we can look to there, particularly in the United Kingdom, where Labour went from being basically a non-existent party to being in charge of the country for a lot of the latter half of the 20th century. All these things are valuable lessons that we can draw upon. And I think sometimes there can be a tendency on the part of the left for us to think that our cause is so right, that's just obvious that we need to win. And I think it is obvious that we need to win, but what happens is when we lose, we get really disappointed and we think it's never going to happen, right? We need to kind of realize that loss isn't just a failure, it's an opportunity to learn. And I think we've learned a lot over this last election, and I'm hoping that we're going to channel those into bigger wins in the future.
I totally agree with that. And that's actually the exact line of logic which I use when people try to hit me with this bullshit, which is that they're post-partisan and that there's no point in even engaging electoral politics at all. Obviously, Bernie Sanders is the reason why there's a left in this country. There is this is the reason there's an independent media sphere. This is the reason why there's a robust DSA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we just let, if another future opportunity in the same vein escape us, that would be detrimental, if not suicidal, to any sort of sustainable left movement going forward. We're going to need more people getting involved, and that's created by, the excitement, or whatever you want to call it, of an electoral campaign. I mean, that's why I became a socialist in 2015, because of Bernie Sanders. Before that, I didn't think there was any possibility of there being an actual sustainable movement, like you said. So I think that's undeniable. And again, I really do take issue with people that are like, they're so defeated by what happened to Bernie Sanders that they're like, it just, set up a fucking, soup kitchen shop and forget electoral politics. We can do both. I'm 100% for mutual aid, but that doesn't mean we can't pursue another kind of movement that, and even if it's like totally chaotic or quixotic or whatever the fuck the word is, like, even if it's doomed to fail, I still think it's worth it, just to get people excited or interested or on board with these ideas again, like I did, what Bernie Sanders did to me. But yeah, I did want to get into this story real quick. Because I promised people via the headline we would talk about it, which is Rashida Tlaib actually confronting Joe Biden on the tarmac in Detroit.
Yeah, just to kind of add into that while we're looking for the clip. I guess, are you guys, just to get your guys' broad thoughts really quickly, are you guys surprised at all by the posture that Biden's taking, considering how dramatically unpopular the strikes against Palestine have been?
No, I'm frankly not. I mean,
yeah, neither am I.
Yeah, he's campaigned as a moderate, and quite frankly, an interventionist American foreign policy hasn't been popular since 2004, when Bush II, got into office and initiated the catastrophic war on terror that led hundreds of thousands to die, right? And what would happen, I imagine, in his brain, is that if he were to take a hard line against Israel, it would create a lot of foreign policy ripples around the globe that would disrupt the status quo and might actually require the United States, from his perspective, to intervene in areas of Middle East politics that he just doesn't want to get involved in, right? What's the easiest thing for him right now is just to stay the course, support Israel as a staunch ally, and not try to shake the pot too substantially. And I think that's absolutely the wrong approach to take, because it's allowing needless human suffering to perpetuate, as it has for many, many decades right now. But quite frankly, what are you going to expect from a guy like Joe?
Well, he lays it out for us here.
Yeah, this is his response to Representative Tlaib.
I'm Rashid Tlaib. Where's Rashid? I tell you what, Rashid, I want to say to you that I admire your intellect, I admire your passion, and I admire your concern for so many other people. And it's from my heart, I pray that your grandmom and family are well. I promise you I'm going to do everything to see that they are on the West Bank. You're a fighter, and God, thank you for being a fighter.
So what's your reaction, guys?
Well, I'm not surprised you decided to take this tone. This is what won him the election, right? The minute I knew that Joe Biden was probably going to carry 2020 was actually during that first debate where he was talking about Hunter Biden. And he came across as compassionate, warm, kind of like that grandfather that, you sometimes take issue with because he says a few racist things every now and then, but he's generally a pretty amiable guy. And I just thought he came across looking a lot better than somebody like Donald Trump. And that's exactly the same kind of pose that he's taking here. Moderate, grandfatherly, sage. It's very much a posture that's been carefully constructed and conceived of by his supporters, and I'm sure by all the different aides out there. And
I almost prefer the honesty of Trump on this issue because their actions are the same. Their actions are the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the big problems with the Democratic Party when it comes to foreign policy, right? Which is that they do almost exactly the same thing as the Republicans. They just happen to put a nice face on it. And it's like that meme going around, that's very popular shows. There's a picture of Republicans and they're just dropping bombs in the Middle East. And then there's a picture of Democrats. They're dropping bombs on the Middle East, but they have a gay pride and Black Lives Matter flag on it. Same difference in the end. But one of them just happens to have more platitudes to say about what's going on. And I am not quite with you, Gavin. I do think it is actually important that sometimes they gesture to try and be better, because sometimes if people gesture to try and be better, you can use that as a wedge to try to push them in that direction. But it's not really all that much.
I would argue it's counterproductive. I would completely argue that it's counterproductive because you have a lot of well-meaning liberals now that are going to see that and be like, "Oh, Joe Biden stands with the one, essentially one out of 2 or 3 Congress women who's taken a stand at all in the sense he's with her. He's calling her a fighter and all that shit. Meanwhile, he's literally funding the occupation, the apartheid situation going on in her hometown. I just think it's nothing but virtue signaling. It's just like I could pull out a gun and shoot someone in the face and then turn around and say, "Hey guys, how's it going?" Does that make me any better than the person that just turns around and spits on the floor and walks away? Like I don't understand how that has any iota of difference.
I don't think it makes you better. What I think it means is that you're at least posturing as a better person, and you aren't because you're probably also a hypocrite. But at least the posture is significant because strategically that means people can put pressure on you to actually live up to what you say. Now, if you present yourself as being a nice person who's actually thoughtful and wants to moderate the situation in the Middle East, then there's a little bit of political wiggle room for you to try to compel them to hold themselves to that standard, right?
Well,
that's just one.
There's no wiggle room with Trump.
Yeah, Trump is just going to sit there and say
you what he says. Yeah,
we support Israel. That's what we're going to do. Fuck all the rest of you, right? And it's very hard to actually try to wedge him in a different direction with that stance.
No, I hear where you guys are coming from, and part of me agrees. I guess if I was going to disagree at all, I would say that there was a larger amount of pushback to Donald Trump. That people like AOC, people like who is for the first time become a little more vocal about this. But Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, they had a lot more cover. They weren't worried about Nancy Pelosi scolding them for coming out and being too hard on Joe Biden. And they could really rally a group, a wide mass of people to do so. Now, I just feel like Joe Biden is going to have the cover like he is doing something. Like if you go to the front page of The Guardian this morning, it acts as if Joe Biden actually is concerned about what's happening in Israel. It's like Joe Biden orders a de-escalation from Israel in the conflict with Palestine, right? And it's like, oh, okay, so Joe Biden is trying to intervene and help, because I just feel like that's a really shallow understanding that most people have. And I don't know. I'm wondering if maybe in the end, I guess we're fucked either way, so we're splitting hairs. I mean, I kind of think too that in that scenario, right, where like AOC or whatever are putting pressure and being outraged at Trump, like that's all that's happening. She just gets to feel outraged. The left gets to get like a little bit of a rush from like pointing out how evil Trump is, but like there's even less chance of anything actually happening other than
leftists get to have their fix to point out how terrible Trump is, as opposed to actually like an opportunity. But I mean, I agree. I mean, the outcome is going to be likely the same, but like at the very least, when someone is, you can at least point someone out to be a hypocrite and like potentially move them like somehow. That's still a better situation to be in than one with like Trump, where he's just like, fuck you guys, I don't care. And then you could just get stuck in this like cringy oppositional cycle where both sides just get to hate each other and like nothing actually happens. And I feel like that's more toxic than I don't know, some opening.
I don't think it's I don't necessarily think it's fair to call it a rush. And I just think it's about consistency, regardless of who's in charge. I'm going to have the same approach to trying to get what I want, which is, in this example, the liberation of Palestine. So, I think when it comes to the people that were calling out Trump super hardcore, like AOC, I think there was actual value to that beyond, just the rush or beyond just the virtue signal, because it actually educated a lot of people that didn't previously pay attention to the horrors going on in our society, to the fact that there were kids in cages at the border and stuff like that going on. Like, these were things that people are better off knowing what their taxpayer dollars are going towards. And even if it doesn't change anything at the end of the day, I'd rather have a societal awakening as to what our tax dollars go towards and the kind of horrors that we fund overseas in our name with our money on issues like Israel. So, even if it is for naught, and even if it doesn't move the needle, I'd much rather have someone like Rashida or AOC out there just 100%. Fucking screaming in front of the White House with a bullhorn about the evils being perpetuated by our political establishment by maintaining the status quo.
But the question is, like, would it be better to have them screaming at a Trump or an AOC, or a Biden? And I think it would be better to have them screaming at a Biden.
I guess that leads into the new question, right? Yeah. Well, yeah. It's that what do we do now, right? Because obviously we have Biden. We're in the situation that we're in. This is where we're at. We need Joe Biden to stop funding the massacre of Palestinians with American tax dollars. I guess what would be your guys' thoughts on the best path forward now?
Well, one of the things I wanted to say just about AOC and Rashida Tlaib, the squad in general, is that as an educator, I see more people inspired to support democratic socialism, however you conceive of it, because of their efforts than virtually any other figure I can think of on the temporary left. And I think that's sometimes underappreciated by people who are already on the left and just think it's the right thing to do. And that's fine. It's very important to be critical of the squad and not to idolize them or see them as perfect in some way, shape, or form, or as representative of what we need. But in terms of the kind of inspirational effect that they've had on my students, not just in the United States, I should say, but also in Mexico, right? Having somebody who's young, active, is willing to call out Israeli apartheid. Just like
Obama. Yeah, I mean, he was also extremely inspirational.
Exactly. But I mean, the thing is, they're generally prompting a lot of young people to support more radical causes than even somebody like Obama was, right? I mean, if you think about what Obama was advocating for in 2008, it was pretty empty, right? Hope, change, more universal kinds of healthcare, and an end to the war in Iraq. That was better than Bush, but it's not nearly good enough. AOC is advocating for stronger unionization, a very ambitious environmental policy, calls Israel an apartheid state, and is willing to be a lot more insistent that we tackle things like income inequality. And is it enough? No. Does she have a really good set of institutional solutions to this? No. But is she inspiring a lot of 18 to 20 somethings I know to take an interest in a lot of that stuff and maybe go pick up Karl Marx, Noam Chomsky, or whatever? Yes. So I see them overall as being a really positive development for those of us on the left, right? That's one of the reasons I admire what Tlaib did when she called out Biden. Was it a little bit, of a posture? Sure, but it was inspiring posture. And I do know that a lot of my students this week were messaging me about it, saying that was pretty cool. Maybe I should look into this a little bit more. So I say good on her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've always maintained on the show that is the one virtue of having the squad members in Congress. And like I said, with the Bernie thing, regardless of if it doesn't even actually move the needle policy wise, it's still, pursuit that's worth pursuing because it's going to get like young people excited like me, like your students. That being said, I do worry too that now that they've been there for a while, they're going to teach people that, the correct way to change the establishment is to become the establishment, and then incrementalism, how far off are we honestly from them adopting just a purely incrementalist philosophy? That's pretty much what they've been reduced to. So I worry, that they're going to, co-opt some of that revolutionary or whatever energy, and then also turn that into, okay, well, we just need to push Biden left, whatever that means, which none of them are actually doing, except for maybe now Rashida, because she's actually storming up to him on the tarmac and being like, what the fuck is this? That's about the closest I've seen to really like an active effort to push Biden left.
Probably the most badass thing that anybody's done in this congressional term. I think and I don't think we should. And I've been critical of the squad on this stream. I do want to make my position on this clear. That was amazing, and that's exactly the kind of shit that I've been beating my fists on the fucking table, being like, we need to do more of that. So
I don't know. AOC playing Among Us with the NDP leader in Canada was pretty badass. I'm not gonna lie. It made me laugh a lot. Fucking my sister messaged me, like, you seen what's happening here? I'm like, I don't know, that's neat.
Yeah, she did it with Hassan too, right?
Yeah, Hassan Piker, right?
Yeah, Hassan Piker. But anyway, yeah, I did. Before we wrap, did you guys have any thoughts on the road forward for that, and how we as the left, and not just in the America, but North America broadly, how do we come together to stop the broader Western support for the occupation of Palestine?
Well, here's where I tend to evoke Karl Marx as an important inspirational figure, right? Because Karl Marx is often held up as the revolutionary leftist par excellence. And that's absolutely correct. He was a revolutionary theorist, both in terms of the content of what he was arguing for and in terms of the means by which we go carry out reform. But it's also worth noting that he didn't see there as being any kind of contrast between revolutionary and radical agitation and the kind of incrementalist policies that are being advanced by the squad. On the one hand, he could sit there and say what we need to do is overcome the limitations of capitalist society as it exists in the 19th century. But he could also say things like we need to support lowering the working day. We need to support reform bills that allow more people to vote. We need to support nascent social democratic parties if they're the only kind of left-wing force in the country, because that's how you actually build momentum for bigger progressive policies down the line. He wasn't a person who would sit there and just didactically say one or the other. He was much more like somebody like Slavoj Žižek today, who would say, do we need radical reform or incrementalism? Yes, please. We want both of them. And that's the approach that I tend to take, right? I can support Tlaib, I can support AOC, I can enjoy them playing Among Us with the NDP leader and helping a lot of young people become attracted to left-wing ideas. And then it's our job, all of us here on this channel, to take them that next step further. That's the way I think of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I would also just quickly say something about before I touched on this idea of being a nonpartisan leftist, and I guess I just kind of wanted to push forward the idea that I think it's really important for us to refocus on the outcomes that we want. What kind of a life do we want for people to live? What is our conception of what the point of being a leftist is? What do we concretely want people's life to be? And I feel like when we get stuck a little bit too much behind the signifier of socialism, or I mean, one example quickly is this is related to point out what I'm talking about is, people were talking about Trump as being a fascist or whatever. And, I think there is reason to think that, but I think we got too stuck on the label of of calling him a fascist. But I think it would be more helpful to talk about what makes what Trump's specifically doing bad. Talk about the specific things that he's doing that are bad instead of just being fascist. And I think similarly, rather than being we're going to be a socialist, talk about what actually we want that's going to be good. And what's going to be, what do we want politics for? What kind of life, what kind of society do we want to create concretely, as opposed to just hiding behind the label?
Yeah.